So today we're doing interacting with databases. This is great stuff today. This is really powerful stuff. It turns out there's a whole set of tools that I can use just to read data from databases built right into Excel, no VBA necessary. We're not going to cover those. We're really just looking at how do I use VBA to interact with databases. And so if we look in the schedule for today, oh, incidentally, I didn't quite get chapter 28 posted into the book. So chapter 28 is what is the content for today, and so I've put the Word chapter here, and I should have it integrated into the book by the weekend. But you can download the Word file if you want to get started on that earlier. But then I've also given one little thing of notes that I thought, you know what, we don't need to type all of this in. So if I come to where it says database notes, it's just a text file. So it will show some stuff here that I'm going to have you copy into the workbook that we're building as we go. Oh, and I had some notes I was going to bring today. I left them back in my office. Hope I can remember how to do this. All right. Might have to take a couple of notes off the Word file. All right, but we are going to start with a brand new blank Excel database, our Excel workbook. What's new in Excel? Why did it say that? I don't know. Okay, and we're going to come right over. Let me just point to you where the tools are available to be able to work with a database, just to do a read-only data connection. If I come to data, over here there's something like from get external data from other sources. So if we wanted to, we could connect right onto the corporate database here, specify information about how we're connecting. You'll probably have to talk to someone in IT to get the parameters to how to connect to the database. You can specify those and just bring the data in, no VBA necessary. We're going to focus on doing this through VBA. So I'm going to come to my VBA editor, and we'll insert a module. So I'll make a sub-procedure. Why don't we just call this one get data? Now, first thing to realize is that to be able to read data from a database, a relational database management system, there are two different objects that we need to work with. One is a connection object. It gets connected to the database. It's just everything we need to talk to the database server. The second we need is called the record set property. The record set property, can you guess what it does? It deals with probably a blank of what? A blank of blank. What is it? Set of records. Yeah, so I've got some set of records that I want to deal with. I'm going to use the record set object to specify that set of records, and I will then connect. I will use that record set with the connection to get me to the right database to actually retrieve the data. Now, many of the objects we work with in this class are already built into Excel. Some of them we've had to create, but they weren't. They're kind of readily available for us to create, like a collection object. We've got to create those collections when we're going to make a new collection, but it's just a part of VBA. To be able to work with databases, we're going to have to put a reference to another set of objects because it's not native to VBA. And so step one in all that, maybe I'll just put a note here, comment, because for this to work, we need a reference to the Microsoft Activex data objects library. Okay, so here's how we're going to make the connection to the Microsoft Activex data objects library. We are going to come to Tools, References. It seems like we've been here before. Haven't we done? We did something else in here, but I don't remember what it was. But we've got to come all the way down here. There's hundreds of different objects we can do. I want to find the Microsoft ActiveX data objects library. There's so many to choose from. 2.0, 2.1, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, and then we skipped to 6.1. What happened to the 3s and the 4s and the 5s? I have no idea. We just skipped. And the truth is 2.8 I know works just fine. If you don't have 6.1, choose 2.8. But if you've got 6.1, you might as well use the most recent one. When we're making references to these other objects, these other collections of objects, you've got to actually check the box. It's not enough just to highlight it in blue. You've got to make sure that box is checked. Then we'll say OK. And that just says, all right, we're going to read in other objects that you have available to you now here in VBA. And that's going to give us a series of objects called the ADODB, Active Data Objects Database Objects, ADODB. And so step one is for us to create an ADODB connection. So that's the first object that we need. So dim, I'm just going to call it CN for connection, as a new ADODB dot connection object. See, record set's down here too, but right now we need the connection object. If when you type in ADODB dot and you don't get a list of things to choose from, you don't have the reference in there correctly yet. So if you're not seeing the list of objects to choose from, go back to Tools, References, and make sure you've got the Activex Data Objects Library. There's one that looks really similar, like Activex Data Record Set Object or something. That's not the one you want, the Data Objects Library. Okay, anyone having troubles here? We're good? Ooh, wonderful. Okay, so now that we have the connection object created, someone remind me what this word new does here. What's the difference between doing this with the new and without the new? Anyone have that? Go ahead. Right. So if I did this right now, all I would do is create a variable that's allowed to hook up to a connection object. And then later I'd have to say, I want to actually connect this up to a connection object. But if I put the word new right here, it says, not only do I want to create a variable that's allowed to connect up to this, make one of these and connect it up at the same time. And so that's what new is doing for us here. Okay, so now we're going to open that connection. We're going to call the open method of the connection object, cn.open. And now we're going to give it the connection string, which, since we're going to use the same connection string in multiple places, I'm going to go ahead and define it as a module level constant. And the constant name is just going to be connection string. And that's the first item that we have to copy from our notes for today. So if I come over here, that's const connection string equals this long connection. We'll take a look at it once I get it brought here into VBA. And I'll just copy that first line from that note file and plug it in right under option explicit. That'll make it a module level constant. And what's a constant? Constant is just exactly like a variable, except I don't get to change its value. It's a nickname for a location in memory where a value is stored, just like a variable. The difference is a variable's value can change while the code's running. A constant can't. I set the value at while I'm designing, and then we live with it. So the properties then that this has, this is basically telling us what do we need to know to be able to connect on to this database. And there are several things. First one we need to know is we got to know the data source. So what's the server that I'm going to connect to talk to this? Thank you, my son. And so the server, and this is just a host name, could be an IP address, could be a host name, but this is something that's going to route me to the server that's running the database I'm trying to connect with. Does Colonial Bakehouse sound familiar? Yeah, it's the same database server that was serving the data for that web page where we're getting like food inspection information from the city of Chicago. And so that's the server. It's out there somewhere. I think it's somewhere in Phoenix. I'm not sure. It's just some web host that's hosting that for me. I've got to tell it on that server which database do I want to deal with, and that's what this next parameter says. Initial catalog is VBA. That's actually the name of the database. When I set up this database, I said, oh, this is the database I'm going to use for examples in the VBA class. I'm going to call the database VBA. Thinking back on it now, I probably shouldn't have called it that because you probably think that has something to do with the language we're using. It doesn't. It's just a name. It's the name of the database. We then are going to have a username. So this is someone, a credentialed user on the database, someone who's allowed to access that data. So one of the things that relational database management systems are really good about saying which users are allowed to have access to which sets of data, what are they allowed to do? Just read it, update it, delete it, what are they allowed to do with it? And so this is the user whose credentials we're going to be connecting with. And then we're also specifying the password here, and that was just a password that popped into my mind when I was making the account. The Alamo returns. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a password. I'm not sure what it would mean if the Alamo were to return. I don't know what that would mean, but fortunately, it's just a password. So those are the three things that we've got to tell it. We've got to tell it which database we're talking to. Well, I guess it's four things. Which server we're talking to, which database on that server we want to work with, which username and which password we're going to be connecting with. And we've got to set one more property before we open. So we're going to say cn.provider. We've got to tell it, is it trying to work with a Microsoft SQL Server provider? Is it trying to work with an Oracle provider? You know, how is it going to actually try to do the communication? So we're going to set the provider property, and that's going to be, thank you, cn.provider. And this is going to be SQL OLEDB. SQL OLEDB. And that's going to get us connected up to SQL Server. Incidentally, folks, one note on this little thing with the password. I'm putting the password in the code just to make things easy for us today. Probably never a good idea to embed a password into your code, unless you're trying to make it really easy for yourself. And still would, but then this is really a security risk. Fortunately, this credential, VBA user, who's the user account, and this password, these are published public credentials. And so I really am not trying to keep these hidden from anyone. The book actually shows you kind of a slick way to be able to make it prompt each time, but you could do it yourself just by saying, instead of making this a constant, let's just make it a variable. We can compose this string. We could build a form that prompts the user for the username and password, injects it in just before we open it. Okay, so that should be enough to get us connected to the database. Anytime I open a connection, this is generally true of, anytime I open any object, chances are I'm going to want to close it when I'm done. It's easy to forget to close it. So I'm going to close it now, and then I'll work between the open and the close. cn.close. And so inside this block, I should be able to have an active connection to the database that will allow me to interact with that server and pull data down. I'm going to run this just as it is right now and make sure that I don't get any errors. If that runs without error, then I'll know it connected to the database. It didn't do anything once it got there, but it connected to the database, successfully closed, and came down. It turns out, we've talked about ports in this class before. Remember, anytime we're working with an internet protocol and we're talking to a server, we have to specify two pieces of information. We got to somehow get it to the host, either with a host name or an IP address, and we got to tell it which port it's listening on. It turns out that SQL Server, by default, and that's what this server is, listens on port 1433. If I don't tell it which port, it's going to guess port 1433. If you are on the BYU guest network, the guest network does not route port 1433 traffic, and so you won't be able to make this connection. You've got to be on the secure connection. Okay, so do we have any folks that are trying to make this connection and failing, getting an error? Got to be at least a couple of us. Super TAs, see what you can do to help us here. We'll pause the video. There's a couple here in the back, and I'll look down here and see if we can. Okay, so the question is, why does the BYU guest why doesn't it work on the guest network? And the answer is, we've got, kind of this open network that any evil person could come to campus and just get on. That network. And so the guest network lets you communicate with a whatever full of routes that are open. We said deny all traffic except ports, and that network will route it. And it's just saying, if you a web page email, you can get authorized. You want to know who you are. And so it's just a security thing. Yeah, chances are at home you're not blocking any ports. Okay, turns out, did I tell you this? Did I tell you about the slammer worm in this class? So in the early 2000s, might have even been the year 2000, 2001, something like this, there was a vulnerability in Microsoft SQL Server 7. And by default, when you installed it, it automatically opened up itself for communication from the internet. And so there were literally thousands of SQL servers running out there in the world that had no idea they were exposed to internet traffic, and someone wrote a program that said, oh, there's a vulnerability here. Let's just infect another machine, and all that machine's going to do is it's going to randomly pick an IP address and try to infect another SQL server at that address. That's all it did. But it did it really fast. And within 45 minutes from when the attack started, the internet was dead. And it was dead for about 24 hours. You couldn't do anything on the internet because there was so much port 1433 traffic with all of these SQL servers just saying, oh, let's infect it. No, infect it. No, infect it. No, infect this one. And then it would get infected, and it would start going, okay, infect this one, infect this one, infect this one. And so, imagine that you're, Amazon, and you just got turned off for 24 hours. Is that a big deal to you? Yeah, that's huge. Did it reduce any of your fixed costs? No. Did it reduce any of your revenue? Yeah, like 1/365th of it is gone. Poof. Well, maybe some people would have waited till the next day, or they just might have gone to Sears and bought whatever they were getting. I don't know. So, if you're an ISP, you're going crazy. What's all this traffic? And you start to study it, and you go, oh my gosh, this is all port 1433 traffic. Quit routing port 1433 traffic. If someone wants to route 1433, just say no and just stop it. So for years after that, you could not reliably route port 1433 traffic on the internet just because there were too many routers out there with rules in them that just said, dump the traffic off. So why did I tell you that? I don't know, because it's kind of interesting. It has to do with the ports and whatever. But yeah, there we go. Okay, so let's get back to databases. All right, so now we should be ready to actually make a connection. We got the connection. We now want to ask for some data. Okay, so chapter 28 has it's huge. It is a behemoth chapter. It's got a whole section just on trying to understand how do we work with databases. Not even talking about VBA, but just the idea of working with a relational database management system. The standard language for interacting with relational database management systems is structured query language. And so to do this, we've got to know a little bit about structured query language. There's a great primer on it there in that chapter 28. Let's just take a peek at it real quick. I'm going to come over here to a browser, and I'm just going to go to colonialbakehouse.com/SQL. And that should bring up some little SQL interface that I wrote one sunny afternoon. And I'll use the credentials VBA user and the Alamo returns right from that connection string to get connected onto this database. So over here's a username and a password. I'll plug in the password, VBA_user. And I should just be able to execute that default query there. And it will just tell me, what tables are available to me. There really are not a whole lot in the VBA database. Here they are, and they're owned by a different user called VBA admin. But it turns out that for this user, VBA user, the default place that he looks to try to find tables is in the space called VBA admin. So I should just be able to say select star from, and then any one of these. We'll do customer, or we'll do cust. That's the one we're working with. It's a little bit smaller. And so if I say select star from cust, I should see these 20 or 21 customers here. Star just says how many columns do I want to select. And if I say star, it means all of them. I could say just the first name and the last name or whatever. I can restrict the records, and I'll let you deal with that. If you don't already know how to do that with structured query language, take a look at the chapter. It's got great information on it. So here I've got a web interface that has all the information necessary to connect onto that database, username, password, some connection string. I'm specifying a query, and this program, this web page now makes the same request to that, makes a request to that database server and gets the records back. We want to do the same thing, but we're going to do it from VBA. Instead of displaying it in a browser, we're going to display it on the worksheet. So that's where we're headed. We'll make one more change here. I'm going to change the order in which these records come back. So at the very end of this, I will say order by customer ID in descending order. So order by customer ID desk. And then it should be exactly the same thing, but now I'll have the highest customer IDs at the top down to the lowest. There's only 21, so it's a pretty small set of customers. Okay. Anyone trying to do this part that's not getting that query to execute? All right? Okay, so I'm going to copy this out, and I'm going to go ahead and create a variable. I'll call it SQL as a string, and then I will set that variable equal to that string. SQL equals select star from order by customer ID descending. Now, this doesn't do anything to the database, right? This is just putting that collection of characters into a variable. Now we're ready to say, what does it take to actually open up that record set? The first thing it takes is the record set object. So let's come up here and declare a new object, a new variable, dim rs as a new ADODB.recordset. So now that I've got a record set object, and I've got my query specified, and I've got an open connection, I should be able to ask for those records. So, rs.open. So the record set has an open method as well. We're going to tell it the source. The source is which source do I use for the record set? What's the definition of the record set? And for us, it's the variable SQL. And so we're telling it that's the set of records we want. We now have to tell it what connection. It has to have an active open connection, and that's the next parameter. What's the connection? What do we put here? CN, our connection object. And so that should open up the record set to get those records. I just opened a record set. What am I going to do before I forget? Close it. rs.close. Okay. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here on the close, and I'm going to run this statement. That's going to give us like 60 connections to this database. That should be okay. Now, I should be able to ask for some information about this record set. Ultimately, we're going to get this coded in, but I just want to play with it here in the immediate window. So I'm just going to say rs dot, and there's a property called fields. Fields is a collection of each of the columns in my database. So it's another thing we call columns. We call them fields. It's kind of an older word for it, but this is just a set of the columns in the database. So I'm going to ask how many columns there are. Fields, that's a collection, so I should have a count. And it should tell me how many fields there are. There's 9 fields. Does that make sense? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, there they are. There's 9 of them. So it's telling me, yeah, there's 9 of these guys right here. It's a collection, and so I can refer to them individually. So I'll say, I want to see what's number 1. And I'm going to ask for its name. That should tell me the name of the number 1 field. First name, is that right? Oh, wait a minute. What's our first field? Customer ID. What's going on? It's 0-based. So even though it's a collection, most collections, in fact, probably all collections that are native to VBA, where do they start? 1. This is a collection, not part of VBA, it's some other object. Whoever made this object thought, let's start counting at 0, even though it's a collection. Is that okay? That's okay, they can choose that, but we've got to deal with that. And so our first one in the fields collection is number 0, and that's the customer ID. And so since I'd like to make this kind of a general purpose, query, I want to be able, you just tell me the query and I want to bring in all the data. Let's start by saying, let's lay in the column headings that we need. We don't know what they're going to be. Well, we do because right now the query is hard-coded, but we'd like to be able to change that at some point. And so let's just say, look across this collection of columns and write the column names in. So to do that, I'll need some kind of a control variable to handle my loop, and I could do this either with a for each loop, or I could use a for next loop. Which one do you want to do? I'm happy with either one. You want to see for each? Okay, to do for each, we're going to dim another variable. Dim, I'll just call it F, for short for field, as an ADODB. I'm not sure it's ADO. We could definitely use just a generic object variable. Let's see if there's an ADODB one that works for us. ADODB dot. Nope. We're just going to do it as object. So object just says we don't care what kind of object it's going to bind onto, but we need some object here that we'll use for our for each loop. We've got the connection open. Now I will say for each f in rs.fields. Debug.print f.name. Remember that what the for each loop does is that the control variable that I put right here, on each iteration, it gets bound on to a different element in the set that I'm going across. So the first time through, f is going to be hooked up to my first field, my number 0 field. Second time through, it'll be hooked up to the next one. So even though I'm only ever saying print f.name, it's going to print something, well, it should print 9 different values. So that should, right now, just to my immediate window, print off the names of my column. There they are, customer ID, first name, last name, city, state, etc. Oh, that's why I kind of liked using the numbers, because I'm going to have the number to be able to go across the columns that I'm writing to. So let me go ahead and change dim f as an integer. Ooh. That's going to make me rerun my code. Let me cancel that. Escape. Cancel. And I'll just do this. I am going to want to use this as a for next loop. So dim, when I said I didn't care, I lied. I'd like to do it as a for next. Dim x as a byte. And I'm going to comment out this other loop, and we'll just do it again as a number. For x equals, I'll do it 1 to rs.fields.count. Now I've got to remember my fields start their index at 0. And all I want to do here is I want to write to my active sheet, I want to write to that first row. I'm going to put my column names on the very first row. Whatever my active sheet is. So cells, sub row number 1, column number x, first time through the loop, x is 1. Dot value is going to be equal to the current field that I'm looking at. rs field sub x minus 1 because it's 0 based, and I want the name of that field. Question here.
Should x go from 1 to fields count plus 1 so that it gets the last one?
So the question is, should I have x go to field count plus 1? And the answer is no, because field count tells me how many there are. Even though it starts counting at 0, field count's going to give me a number 1 higher than the last index I have to work with.
Which would be u-bound, right?
Yeah, u-bound would tell me what the upper boundary is.
Oh, okay.
If it was an array. Collection doesn't, there's no analogous function for u-bound for a collection. Okay, so now what that should do is it should, if I run that loop, that should just write those values out to whatever my active sheet is. And there it is. It's put out customer, first name, last name, street address, city, put them all out right here. Very nice. So questions on what we did here? The record set has a property called fields. It's a collection that refers to every single column. I mean, for every single column there. Now here's the other trick that we're going to bypass a little bit here. And that is that field holds one record's information at a time. So right now it should actually have the first record's values as well. So I'm going to come back up here to my immediate window, and I'm just going to say rs.fields sub 1. That should give me my first name field. Right? If I ask for the name, it tells me the name, but I can also ask for the value. The trick is the field object holds one row's value at a time. So this should be the very first first name in my set. Let me go take a peek at that data set. There it is, Lila. Lila? And so there it is. If I look at the last name by looking at the second column, we can see that there. Oops, we can see that there as well. So it's Lila Stein. What do you think? Do you think I can refer to these fields by their name as well as by their number? Give it a shot. Last name. Sure. So if you know exactly the set you're working with, your code will be readable if you say, I'm looking at the last name field. In our case, we're trying to make it general, so whatever query you give me, we can write it out. Yep.
So would we have to use the for each rather than the for if we wanted to? Like when we did the for.
Yeah, so here's the question. Should we, I mean, if we're not sure if it's going to start at 0 or 1, should we use in for each for this? And the answer is, well, yeah. If we didn't know we'd be starting at 0 or 1, probably use for each. But here's the other answer to that. You always know it starts at 0. The fields collection is a 0-based collection. It will always start at 0. I'm pretty sure there's no way to tell it to behave otherwise. Okay, yeah, and the reason I switched to the for next is because I needed to have some way to tell which column I was at. I could do it out here by making x and incrementing x and running it across. This is cleaner. So one thing that I could do is I could now enter a loop that actually tells me to go to the next record, print the values, go to the next record, and loop across to print the values. So in fact, let me do this. We're not going to do it. You'll see it. You'll see this example in the textbook. I'm going to show you a shortcut. I can say rs.move next. That moves to the next record. The record object holds only one row at a time. When I say move next, it goes down and says I got the values from the next row. So now if I ask for the last name, it should be something besides, what was it before? It shouldn't be Stein, it should be, whatever that name is, des Schulmeister. That's probably German, des Schulmeister. Okay, and there it is. And I can keep moving down until I get to the end of the set. There's a way to tell if I'm at the end and then get out of the loop, and that's all talked about in the book. But there's a great shortcut. Not only is it less code, it's way faster to execute. It turns out that a range property, let's just go to our second, we'll go to A2. We're ready to put the data right here in A2. So let me refer to range A2. It has a property. And that property is called copy from record set. I've only used it like twice, but this is a great thing. Copy, C-O-P, there it is, copy from record set. So a range object is smart enough to know, you know what, we work with data around here a lot. And if I got a record set that hooks up to some data, I just want to take that record set and dump it, starting right here at this range. And so I got to give it, you know, what's the data set that I'm going to work with? So what do you think my data set is? Which object do you think it is? RS is my record set. I can literally tell range A2, pull the data out of this record set and go. And it will. So I'll run that. It's only one line. I'll go back and look at my worksheet, and all of my data are here. It just brings it in with one statement. That's fabulous. Yeah. Oh, so the question is, if I didn't import the column headings, would it bring the column headings in for me? And the answer is no, although I'm not that familiar with it. Maybe there's another parameter out here that tells it. Max rows, max columns. No, there's nothing here that will tell us to bring the column headings. We got to bring the column headings in the hard way. Good thing we know about loops and such. And in fact, you know, before this method was introduced, and I think it came around in 2003, if you want to do this in VBA before then, you just made a loop that went across all the record set, and then on each, you'd have a loop within a loop. Inside that loop, you'd go across each field. Move to the next record, go across the field. Move to the next record, go across the field. But now this is great. Just copied in from the record set. Let's just do a couple of more things here now that and that's really what it takes to get our data set up. Right? We've brought the data in. The record set can close. The connection can close. I just want to do a couple of more formatting things. Let's make our data look a little nicer. So let's just do this. We're going to set up a range that's going to copy just our, not going to copy, but it's going to get a reference just to these column headers. What's a good way to do that? We don't know how many there are. I guess we could ask. But how are we going to find out? How are we going to refer to just that set? Any thoughts? Which object should we use? Which property or method? What do you think? What I want to do is I want to change the background color, I want to change the font color, and I want to make these bold. So here's how I can do it. I know it's going to be on row 1, so I will just say I'm going to specify a 2-dimension range. Range starting with, I'll specify one cell here, my starting cell, that's always going to be A1. I can actually just put that in quotes. A1. And then the second range I'm going to specify here, be a little more complicated. Here I'm going to start with range A1. Cells. Which cell do I want? Well, the row is going to be 1. The column is the tricky part. Here I'm going to say I want the very last column on the whole page. I want this one way out here. I'm going to start all the way at the right, and then I'm going to move to the left until I bump into data. And that's going to give me the end of my data that I want to format. So how do I say the very last columns.count? Just tell me how many columns there are. From there, I want to say end. This is going to give me a range that starts in A1 and ends in whatever the last column is that has data on row 1. And in fact, that range, I want to do a bunch of things with that range. So I'll just start up a with statement, or with clause. With that, yeah, I guess I'm going to have to end my code. Whenever you start a with block, it gets a little bit antsy and says, we're going to have to start again with this. That's fine. End with. So that's going to be that whole range, and I want to do those 3 things. What were they? Of that range, I want to set the interior dot color equal to dark blue. Turns out there's a constant for that. It's called RGB dark blue. It's just a number, right? Your colors in VB are all numbers. And so dark blue is color number 9,109,504. That's dark blue. I don't want to think about that number, so we have a constant for it. I want to set the font's color to white. So from that ranges dot font dot color equals RGB white. And I want to change the font to bold. Font.bold equals true. Ooh, I'm going to do one more formatting thing. In fact, I can do it right up in here as well. So with that range, I'm going to say dot entire column. So I've got that, whatever that range is, takes now the whole column that goes with that range, and I'm going to tell it to auto-fit. And so I'll say, however wide the data is, make the columns wide enough to handle the data. Depending on the data I'm working with, I may not want to do that. This data is pretty short, and so it makes sense to do it. All right, we're ready to run it again, except I would like to do one more thing before we run it again, and that is, at the very beginning here, I'd like to wipe out the value of all the cells. I'm not sure you've ever done this before. Typically, when we use the cells property, we specify row and column. But if I don't specify row and column, I just say cells, what do you think it refers to? All the cells. So I can say cells.clear, and that will just clear all the cells. Is cells a 2-dimensional array? And the answer is no. Cells is a property that returns a reference to a range depending on what parameters we give it. Okay, so I should be able to run that now. Let's see, do I have a breakpoint in here? I'll put a breakpoint on I guess I'm not going to put a breakpoint on at all. I'll just let it run through. And that should bring my data in, appropriately space everything, and give me columns that, column headings that look like column headings. And in fact, that is bold. Even though it doesn't look too bold to me, apparently it is bold. Back to the code. What part do you want to see on the code? Towards the bottom? So that's a pretty successful, we've been at this now for a little over 40 minutes. We've done a pretty good thing. Connected onto some remote database somewhere. We've got to know the parameters to do that. Connected onto a remote database, pulled in an arbitrary query, and dropped the values in there. If you want to change it to show the list of employees instead of the list of customers, select star from employee instead of select star from customer. Run that if you want to. You have to change the order by clause because there's no customer ID in the employee table. But you could change that. It would bring in the data for that relevant table. That's all well and good, but it's not what I'm asking you to do on the database project. For the database project, in fact, let me tell you what that project is. For that project, you're going to be importing a year's worth of crime data as published by the FBI. So the FBI, they collect all kinds of information about crime, and then every year they say, okay, here's the crime numbers. They call it the Annual Crime in the United States Report. And they actually publish like one Excel file per state. And the one I'm going to have you do is actually the crimes on college campuses. So it'll be, the FBI knows about all these crimes on college campuses. So here's the state of Alabama. And it's not a very, you'd think it would be some kind of data format you could import it in. Oh no, it's a table meant to be human readable. And so you're going to have to go through that and say, I'm going to read the data off of this Excel workbook and get it inserted into my database. So your project is actually to read a bunch of Excel files, read the data out of them, and write data into the database. It turns out in the textbook, you can imagine how in the textbook this might be something that's a little bit troubling to cover, because if we've got a centralized database, we'd have every student who's using that textbook right into that one database. And so he doesn't even really show you how to do this. But you're in luck, because I'm going to show you how to do it right now. He hints at it, but doesn't have an example doing it. So this example would be really helpful to you. Okay, so we've got this one called get data. I'm going to make another sub-procedure called insert data. We're going to need a connection object, just like we did before. We'll open that connection object in exactly the same way. We've got the two lines we need to connect, and we'll close the connection. Now, it turns out that what we need to insert a record is another structured query language statement. It's the insert statement instead of the select statement. And so I'll need a SQL variable, and we'll need to fill that variable with the statement that we want to use to insert. SQL equals. Oh, that's the other note I gave you. So if we come back to the note from the class web page, we've got two lines that says SQL equals, and this will be a parameterized query that will allow us to do the insert. And it almost fits on the screen. Oh, it is so close. I'm going to modify, if you just paste that in, you're good. I'm going to modify this a little bit so it can all be seen. Instead of doing it in two separate statements, I'm going to do it in one that breaks across the line. So SQL equals this whole thing, ampersand, this whole string. So it turns out I really could run this query right now, and it would insert someone's name, first name. it would insert those tags for the names and the address and so forth. But of course, I want to change that. So here's the thought. I would just like to make this so that the user can come here, come back to the Excel page, come to the bottom and add a new record here. You can add yourself to the database as a customer. I'll add myself. Gov Allen, 854 North, 1375 West, Provo, Utah, 84604, USA, and some phone number. 801, 422, 1206. So I would like to read these values, and there's a couple of ways that we could do it. If we're trying to make this so that the user could insert an arbitrary number of values here, we could read through this, and as long as we see data here that doesn't have a customer ID, we could say, oh, that's a new customer. We're not going to let the user specify the customer ID because the database takes care of that for us. We insert the customer information, it says, here's your new customer ID for that. But let's start off with just this one, and then we'll see how we want to extend it. So we'll start off by making this read off the information off the active cell. So let's go ahead and fill in that query. I'll want one more variable. I'll just call it R to keep track of which row I'm on. Dim R as an integer, or as a long. Integer would work, but I just like to use long for when I'm dealing with a row. Let's set R equal to the row of the active cell. And now we're ready to start changing that query. SQL equals what it used to be. Actually, we're going to take the replace function, looking at what it used to be, looking for something, replacing it with something. So I want to look for, in this case, this first name tag that I've plopped in here. Because to make this statement work, I want to actually put someone's real first name right there. Insert into this customer all these column names, and the values are going to go in the same order. So how do I get the value? Cells, row number R, column number 2. And I want the value of that. Now I just have to do that eight times. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I just got to go right. I just got to change them right down. Change that to last name, street address, city, state, postal code, county, phone. Oh, I should have changed the numbers first. They were all right in a row. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So that should now give me. Let me darken that 8 in for you. It's probably hard to see from back there. 8. So do you see what this does? I've set up SQL like this, and now I'm saying find first name, replace it with whatever is the current first name, and so forth. Is this the only way to do this? No. I could have just as easily plugged in this expression right in here, but I would have had to close the quotes, ampersand to concatenate it in and put it there. I could make one big long statement that would do it. This just ends up being a lot more readable. It's probably going to take all of 8 or 9 nanoseconds more to execute. It'll probably take maybe as much as a millisecond longer to execute. But it's not going to be a perceptible difference, and this is way more readable. So at this point, all I have is I have a structured query language statement that's formatted and ready to execute. Now I just got to execute it. Well, good news. The connection object has an execute method. All I have to do is give it the command that I want to execute. So I've established the query that I want to execute, the statement I want to execute, and I will just say connection.execute SQL and let it run. If there's an error, this will cause a runtime error, an error that I could trap for. What kind of error was it? Decide what to do. Okay, so folks, what we now have is each one of you has a different interface to the same database. If you add yourself to that database and then run the code here to get the data, not only will you see brought back the record you just inserted, but any record that any other student inserted as well, because we are all hitting a common central database. That's the whole point here, is that we can have different programs sharing a common data repository at a remote location. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this one, make sure my active cell is on the row I want to insert the data from. I'll run this. It runs without error. I'll come and re-execute this. It's always a little bit nervous because you could have inserted anything and it could be embarrassing, but please, don't. We're recording this. For posterity's sake, don't put anything rude. So you'll notice that gov is now gone from the bottom here, and we've got multiple other insertions. So here's the one that I inserted. Well, that's not me. Where's the one I inserted? Here's the one I inserted. Our former one, here's Lila, who was the old first one, and so other folks have managed to insert all these other ones. None of them are quite as nice as mine, all properly formatted. But I'm guessing that some other folks have inserted some since then. So if I come back here and run get data again, yeah, so Ryan now has entered in here. And why do we have all these blank ones? What's going on? TA, hey Cameron, I think we got a question over here. Go ahead. Okay, so the thought is maybe it's case sensitive. We're trying to insert into the, and we don't have the right capitalization on the column names. That's not it. It's not, the column names are not case sensitive. Go ahead.
Just because they're active cells.
Active cells on a blank row. And so when we go to parameterize this, to fill in the parameters on this query, we're saying, hey, what's the value of this? Blank. What's the value of this? Blank. Blank, 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 blank. And SQL Server says, great. You want to enter a blank value for that? I'll take it. So, I should be able to, incidentally, I should be able to come to any row. I mean, this isn't really what we want ultimately, but I should be able to come to any row and hit, run my insert again, and it should insert that data. Again, so I just inserted, 4 or 5 times. If I refresh that data, I should get that insert. I don't want to insert, get data, F5. I should get that record, Will Goins, where I've inserted multiple times. In fact, while I was inserting him, several other people were also inserting and getting their records to come in. Questions?
I think an employee number that's higher than any of these.
Okay, so here. Someone's saying, hey, I'm trying to insert an employee number. What's going on? Let's take a look. So you probably mean a customer number. To successfully put a customer ID, I've got to make 2 changes. Well, 3. First, I've got to tell it customer ID as a column I'm inserting, right? And then I've got to say, I've got to give it a customer ID to change. Now this is a little bit different because the customer ID is a number instead of a string. Just like in VBA for a structured query language, if I have a numeric literal, no quotes. It wouldn't be the end of the world if I put quotes around it because just like VBA, SQL Server will look at that and go, oh, you put quotes around it, you poor, sorry programmer. You didn't mean the quotes, I'll ignore those. But anyway, no quotes necessary. So I can come in here and put no single quotes. I got the double quotes. Whoops. I just want to put in my tag here. I'll call it cust ID. I have another statement here that will put the customer ID in. It's a lot of work to show you that it's not going to work, but I'll go ahead and do it. Cust ID. This is what you're trying to do. Okay, so this should be a properly formed query. I'm going to go ahead and specify, come down here and put in a new record. Well, I'll just come to James Dominic and change him to, 10,000. Some number that's higher than any of these. And I'll now execute the code on that line. It's going to give me an error. Cannot insert explicit value for identity column in table cust when the identity insert is off, which it is. What that means is that that customer ID says, listen, front-end application, whoever you are not allowed to tell me what the customer ID is going to be. The database is saying, I say what the customer ID is. Don't you try to tell me that. I just sent a query that said, make a new customer, put in this customer number. And the database says, no. That's the job of the database. The database is saying, someone's configured me to keep track of this data and make sure that it's all properly formatted, configured, it has integrity, security, all these things. And I tried to do something that violated a rule that the designer, that the creator had made. And the database just says, no, you can't do that. I won't let you do that. And that's its job. Its job is to say no a lot. Unless I give it to it just the right way, it's going to say no. So, yeah, that was a long example to explain why we can't do that. So let me go undo that. I don't think I have that much undo in me. I had almost that much undo. Okay, other questions? Oh, we have time to do. We have a couple of options, but there's a question. Let's go ahead and take it.
So, for example, let's say, like, you're trying to get sales data, and they're keeping on, for example, like Square. Square keeps data. Is something where you could attach to their database the property password and then pull sales data off that?
Okay, so here's the question. The question is, let's suppose I've got an account with Square. This is the mobile payment provider. So I plug this little plastic thing into my phone and swipe someone's credit card, take a bunch of money from them, and everyone's happy. The question is Square going to give me an interface that I could just connect up to their database using this approach and pull my data out? And the answer is no. Square is not going to do that. I'm not familiar. I don't really know, but the thought that they would do that is preposterous in today's world. If I'm my own company and my own internal employees need access to data, I might do this. But if it's a client of mine, if I provide access to that, I'm going to provide it through an API. So I'm going to have like a little program running that says, hey, I'm expecting a kind of a web request to come in, but not meant for a browser, meant to be consumed by a program. And so that program would make the call just in the same way that we make a web call, and I would pass it username and a password or whatever credentials I pass to it. It would then validate me, give me the data that I want, and send it back to me in some format that the program would read. So yeah, this is more when I'm working internally to the company. We've got a relational database management system, and I'm going to connect with it. Let me tell you one of the most important reasons to be able to have this skill. You're going to, no doubt, at some point in your career, you're going to need to get data that you don't currently have access to. You're working on some project. You've got to get this particular set of data that our company has. How are you going to get it? Here's how it normally works. You talk to the guy, you send an email to the guy in IT saying, here's the data I need. What does the guy in IT do with that email? Remember, this is the first time you've emailed him about this. What does he do with it? He ignores it. He sent this to me. Yeah, if they're serious about it, they'll email me again. Is that what the handbook says they should do? No. Is that what they do? Almost always. And so you wait for a couple of days, you don't get a response, and you go, I really need that. You email him again. At which point he goes, oh, they're really serious. I better get started on that. And then, fully intending to do it, he forgets to do it. At some point, you go and talk to the guy. Hey, I need this data. Oh, yeah, I'm working on that, but there's some problem. But I should be able to get it to you by this afternoon. Once you finally talk to him face to face, it's always by this afternoon. I should be able to get it for you. And so, he sends you the data. And that afternoon, about 4:45, you get it, and you go, okay, I don't have time to look at this. I'll look at it tomorrow. First thing in the morning, you come and you look at it, and you go, this isn't what I asked for at all. You email him back, or maybe you skip that part and you go talk to him. Hey, this isn't what I need. I need this. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll get that. And then he'll get that to you by the end of the day tomorrow or something, and then you finally get it. And now this time, you've got exactly what you asked for. Only then you realize what? I didn't ask for what I meant to ask for. I need something else. Do you see the time that it takes to do this? On the other hand, if you could say, hey, IT guy, don't get that data for me. Just give me a connection to the database. Give me a read-only connection to the data that I can have. Sometimes their answer to that is, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. And then you're kind of stuck with the other channel. But quite often it is, oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we've got an account that can give you read access, or we could create an account for you, give you read access just to the data that you need, query away. Because remember, the relational database management system's job is to make sure you can't upset this. In fact, it turns out, even though you have the rights to insert data into this table, let me show you the statement that would delete all the data out of that table. It's a really simple query. Delete from cust. There you go. I execute that, it's going to kill the whole entire table. Oh, wait a minute. The delete permission was denied. See, the database, that's its point, right? You don't have permission to delete any data out of this. You can write to it. You can make new ones. What if I wanted to update an existing record? Unless I've been given permission to update, can't do it. So the whole idea behind a relational database management system, well, it's not the whole idea, but a big part of this is to be able to say, we've got lots of users in the company that need access to this data. We are not going to give, some of these guys are maniacs, and we're not going to give them access to everything. We're going to give them exactly the access to just what they need, and that's all they get. And so the idea that you, as a junior analyst, might be able to actually get access to the corporate database is not beyond the realm of imagination. They're designed to be able to do this. So that's why having this skill is huge, because it just you just say, listen, just give me the credentials to connect, and I'll quit bugging you. Maybe you want to bug them a lot before you ask that question. Convince them that it's really going to be easier for them if they give you those credentials, and then you've got it. Okay, we've only got about 5 minutes to go, which is not enough time to build out a different example. But this really is the heart of what you're going to be doing for the project. The difference is, instead of just reading the data right off of one sheet here, you're going to read on the data that's, you'll open up a worksheet that's got lots of rows on it. They're not going to be as well formatted as these to read these and just plop them in, so you have to kind of look around, get the right data that you want, get that insert statement, execute it, there might be 80 statements to execute from one page. Execute all those, close that file, open the next file, go through it, go ahead and bring them in. All right. I'm feeling the urge to let class out early today, which is kind of uncharacteristic. Questions? If anyone here knows of any reason why this class should not dismiss early, speak now or forever hold your peace. Class dismissed.